Scopa chairperson Songezo Zibi joins us now for more on that. Chair, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Of the entities, PRASA, Transnet, South African Airways, all of them, it seems, having some capital funding shortfalls that need to be resolved speedily. But are any of them in danger of complete collapse at this point?
No, not at all. I think, good evening, thanks for having me, Loli. So, not at all. They're not in danger of collapsing. I think our statement said that they will not be able to meet their economic growth and developmental mandate if they don't get the capital injection. Let me make an example, Loli. PRASA is doing okay, but then a train from Naledi in Soweto to Park Station takes an hour 15, an hour 20 minutes instead of 40 to 45 minutes. There are not enough trains on that line. There could be 3, 4, 5 times more, ferrying more passengers. These trains take longer. And the reason is that the signaling equipment is not available because PRASA cannot afford it at this point. So what I asked the minister was that she must quantify, and thankfully they have, the amount of money that is required for these entities to be able to meet their mandate. Similarly with Transnet and so on.
Yeah. Now, you are, of course, having a lot of South Africans particularly interested in SAA following government's failure to get an equity partner. And where we are sitting now, where now the minister says, well, we might still need to get an equity partner. Seems that is a suggestion rejected by many MPs. What's the rationale for the rejection? But also, what is your view on SAA going forward without an equity partner? What would make it a success?
So the rejection of the equity partner happened in the previous parliament. So it was not this committee that we have now. Although some MPs expressed their opposition to privatization and or to private involvement, what we cannot avoid is the reality that the money has to come from somewhere. There are only 3 places where the money can come. We can borrow it with government guarantees. We can appropriate that money and give it to these entities. In other words, we shift money from education and health and other things and make it available to these entities. Or there is some form of private involvement. Now, one of the examples the minister gave was that, for instance, in Transnet's business, the government could own the railway line and the rail infrastructure and sell concessions to private operators of trains and the like. So that reduces the amount of capital the government would need to lay out in order to solve the entire problem. Now, that's being spoken about. It needs to happen and happen quickly if that is what the government has chosen to do. But we can't keep talking about it at an ideological level and not solve the problem while the economy is dying.
Yeah. Now, while you speak of that, for example, one of those initiatives in the Ngquga area would have, for example, been cancelled, or at least it's being reworked because the private partner, private sector partner, was not happy about the conditions attached to the tender, which they feel were too stringent and costly for the private sector. How do you navigate that space where it doesn't feel like you're giving away these strategic assets to the private sector for zero?
Well, I mean, one of the things we have to reckon with as South Africans is we have to make choices. If the conscious choice is that the government must own 100% of everything and own 100% of the risk, then we must make decisions to finance these institutions. We can't, not want to give the money and then at the same time we don't want anyone else to give the money. I think for any private entity that is going to enter into an arrangement, there's a negotiation that takes place. If the conditions are favorable, then to both parties, then the deal works. If they're not, then the deal falls apart. What we can't have is a situation where there is also an expectation that if the capital is not coming from the state, the private equity partner, whatever type of involvement is, must hand over the money and not say anything, because the real world does not work like that. Nobody gives money and then in an investment and then they say nothing.
Yeah. The need for, I suppose, these entities to get back to pre-COVID levels in terms of performance? Why is that such an important marker, as opposed to just get healthy and you'll build up and get back to pre-COVID levels?
No, it is an important milestone, Polly. For viewers who listen to the Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank, quarter after or announcement after announcement, they talk about some of the constraints being electricity and being transport and logistics, right? And I think it's really, really important that we at least get back to where we were before COVID, because that's when everything fell apart. And the reason it's important is because if you look at PRASA, the infrastructure was working before COVID. Then COVID happened, it was left unguarded, and it was all stolen. So at the very least, can we get to the point where we were when the infrastructure was there, so that we can have the economy functioning? We can then talk about further improvements and efficiencies again. That is why that milestone or that marker is so important, because of what happened to the infrastructure at PRASA and Transnet.
Now, Cabinet is, of course, looking at the issue of the funding, for example, around the Road Accident Fund and really the levies, how they are collected. In our conversation with the CEO of RAF, they are not happy with the funding model currently where it sits, because they are also dealing with a shortfall themselves because of the claims and just the sheer magnitude of what they've got to deal with. What is Scopa's view on how RAF could be funded?
Well, the thing about the Road Accident Fund is that there is general agreement, a unanimous agreement, in fact, that the funding model doesn't work. So on another day, Koli, on your same show, there'll be somebody who's complaining about the fuel levy, that is making petrol or fuel too expensive, right? It is that fuel levy that funds the Road Accident Fund. So we have to make choices about all of these things again. And I think we can't have a funding model that we can't have a funding model that is so vulnerable to these kind of fluctuations. It is not enough. The way the grants, the assistance is given out is such that every claimant who qualifies is paid upfront the entire amount. Sometimes it is huge sums of money depending on income and so on, which effectively bankrupts a fund each year. It's perpetually insolvent. That cannot continue. We need to change legislation. We need to change the claims policy. We need to think about a no-fault system and so on, so that we can have a road accident fund system that is able to survive, to be sustainable, and it is fundable within the fiscus or another mean.
Yeah. Is it within the purview of the committee as well, maybe to support the view of a review of the benefit scheme entirely of the Road Accident Fund?
No, absolutely. One of the roles of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts is not just to catch wrongdoers. It is also to make sure that state entities are in financial health. The Road Accident Fund is not, because of a legislative and policy defect, and it needs to be fixed. So the Standing Committee on Public Accounts cannot be okay with an institution that is perpetually insolvent while a solution is possible.
One of those issues maybe might be that it disadvantages, I suppose, the vulnerable in society, where the lesser those benefits are, the lesser they will get to benefit, particularly when they are in an accident of some sort.
Well, I don't think there is a single South African who looks forward to being in an accident to begin with, first of all, especially not to get serious injuries. There are several things that can be done, Tony. For instance, it can be said that the government guarantees that you will get medical care for the course of your life, as long as it is directly related to the accident. That means the state does not have to pay someone 15 million rand in estimation of what it will cost them for the rest of their lives, right? The state is then able to budget on an annual basis for that expenditure, which drops the amount that is payable or expendable annually to each claimant, as an example. That's a policy decision that can be made. We can also make a decision that these claims will not pay out at private healthcare rates. It will be at a different rate and so on. So there's a variety of policy interventions that can be made, whether someone is poor or not, to say that the way the system works is such that it enables the fund to be sustainable. The final thing I want to say, Toli, is that the reason those with better financial means tend to benefit is because it is so onerous to claim from the road accident fund. If you can't afford a lawyer or get a lawyer on contingency, then you are out in the cold. We certainly need to streamline the system, get something like an independent panel that adjudicates over these matters, take it off the courts, stop paying lawyers billions of rand every year, put that money back into the fund so that we can pay claimants, and the solution for sustainability becomes possible.
Right. Songezo Zibi, much appreciated. Thanks for your time, chairperson of the Scopa committee there, having gotten a briefing from the Department of Transport. Well